When you hear the word inheritance, what comes to mind? Probably property, right? Or money, maybe a family heirloom. But what if an inheritance wasn't just something you get, but something you are called to do? So that's the big question, right? And we're going to dive into it by looking at one of the most foundational stories in the Hebrew Bible, the story of Joshua and the Promised Land. Trust me, it's a narrative that completely flips the script on what it means to inherit something great, both back then and, yeah, for us today. Okay, so let's set the scene. The legendary leader, Moses, is gone. And his successor, a guy named Joshua, now has this monumental task of leading the nation of Israel. His job? To finally claim an inheritance that was promised to their ancestor Abraham literally centuries earlier, the land of Canaan. Now, the key word in all of this is inheritance. But in the Bible, this word meant so much more than just a deed to a piece of land. It was a legacy, a possession, a divine assignment that was totally wrapped up in the identity and destiny of the people. It was both a place and a purpose. And right from the very beginning, this whole inheritance thing was framed in a really interesting way. Just listen to the language here. It's a gift. The Lord your God is giving you this land. But it's a gift that requires action to possess. It's not just going to be handed over on a silver platter. It has to be taken. And that tension right there is at the absolute heart of this story. So, how did this all play out? Well, the journey to claim this inheritance wasn't your typical military campaign. Not at all. It began with a series of spiritual tests that were kind of disguised as battles. And the very first two encounters set the rules for everything that was about to happen. On one hand, you've got Jericho. We're talking a massive, impenetrable fortress. The Israelite strategy? March around it for 7 days, blowing horns. I mean, from a military standpoint, it's completely absurd. But they did it, they obeyed, and the walls came crashing down. An unbelievable victory. And right after that, you have the city of Ai. It's a tiny, insignificant little town. The Israelites are feeling pretty good about themselves, but this time, one person secretly disobeys a direct command from God. The result? They get absolutely routed, a humiliating defeat. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that military strength, strategy, numbers, none of it mattered. The story makes it crystal clear that Joshua wasn't the real general. He was more like the middle manager. The success or failure of the entire mission hinged on just one thing: humble, radical obedience to their true commander-in-chief. All right, so after these huge, dramatic victories, the whole strategy shifts. The focus moves from this one big, centralized conquest to something more like delegated responsibility. Now, the war is far from over, but Joshua, he's an old man at this point, and he stops leading the charge for everyone. Instead, he starts to divide up the mission. And how does he divide up the land? By casting lots. Now, to us, that sounds like rolling the dice, right? A game of chance. But in the ancient world, it was seen as a sacred process to figure out what God wanted. The belief was that God himself was making the assignments. It wasn't random at all. It was divine delegation. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this reframes the entire concept of inheritance. Receiving your plot of land wasn't like getting a retirement bonus. It wasn't the prize at the end of the finish line. It was, as the slide says, a delegation of responsibility. It was a brand new personal mission. And this just nails the core idea. So each of the 12 tribes gets their inheritance, their piece of the promise. But that land was still occupied. The gift came with an assignment. Okay, this is your territory. Now you have to finish the job. It's on you to carry on the work. It was a spiritual succession, passing the responsibility from the one leader, Joshua, to the many. I mean, this idea of an inheritance being a starting line, not a finish line, is so powerful. But not everyone was exactly jumping at the chance to take on their mission. After years and years of wandering in the desert and fighting, a kind of dangerous complacency started to creep in. It was just easier to wait. 7. Just that one number. But it tells a story of hesitation, of procrastination, really. It represents the 7 tribes who, after Joshua gave them their inheritance on a map, did nothing. They had their marching orders, they had the divine promise, but they just stalled. They delayed taking possession of the land. And you see this incredible contrast in attitudes. On one side, you've got Caleb. This guy is 85 years old, a total veteran warrior. He comes to Joshua and he doesn't ask for some easy, peaceful valley. No, he points to the hill country, a place full of giants, and says, "Give me this mountain." He is ready to fight for his inheritance. And then you have the other 7 tribes. Joshua has to actually call them out, basically saying, "Hey, how long are you going to put this off?" They had the exact same promise as Caleb, but a completely different mindset. It's a perfect picture of 2 different responses when you're faced with a huge opportunity that requires huge effort. Now, this whole story of land, battles, and inheritance doesn't just end there in the ancient world. Not by a long shot. For followers of the New Testament, this entire narrative gets picked up and completely reframed, given a new and, you could argue, an even deeper spiritual meaning. The parallels here are, well, they're pretty mind-blowing. It starts with their names. Joshua in Hebrew is Yehoshua. Jesus is just the Greek version of the Hebrew name Yeshua. They're essentially the same name. And get this, they both mean Yahweh saves. So just as Joshua led the people into a physical promised land, Jesus is presented as the one who leads people to spiritual salvation. One distributes an earthly inheritance, the other offers a heavenly one. So here's the crucial point. The physical land of Canaan, this very real earthly inheritance, comes to be seen as a symbol, a foreshadowing of something much bigger. It points toward a heavenly inheritance that's described as eternal, something that can never be destroyed, and it's available not just to one nation, but to everyone who has faith. You can really see the progression here, can't you? Step 1, you have a tangible, material inheritance, land, tied to one nation. Step 2, that evolves into a spiritual inheritance, salvation, that's open to everyone. Which means step 3, the mission itself shifts from conquering physical territory to spreading a message of hope and redemption to the entire world. The inheritance is no longer a plot of ground, but a place in God's eternal kingdom. And that brings us right back to where we started. This ancient story isn't just history, it's a mirror. It forces us to ask ourselves, what promises have we been given? What potential is just sitting there, dormant inside of us? What great inheritance, spiritual or otherwise, are we leaving unclaimed, simply because we're hesitant to step up and take on the mission that comes with it?